The LouieTeeNetwork is powered by MusicHead University. MusicHeads, classes in session. Turn me up. Enroll on YouTube now. Link is in the description.
Who else could it be? Me, your man, Louie T. Welcome to the command post. You know what it is. Post up. Take command. I, of course, am your commander-in-chief, Louie T. Thank you for joining me. So Washington makes another signing, and I'm actually surprised by this one. Didn't really think they needed to go in the wide receiver direction. Maybe there's a little bit more credence to this notion that they weren't looking to do anything until the ownership situation was fully resolved and transferred over, and then they could start making some moves, even the smaller ones. Like, neither of the moves that they've made the last couple of days, are going to cost you a lot of money. Are they going to be moves that necessarily move the needle per se? I mean, the Badgley one could end up being a pretty significant one if he were to make the football team. I still think it's a long shot, but nonetheless, Washington signs wide receiver Byron Pringle, formerly of the Bears last season, and before that, the Kansas City Chiefs for the 3 years prior to last season. So 18 to 21, he was a member of the Chiefs. And then 2022, he was a member of the Chicago Bears. And now he is in Washington on a one-year deal. Again, nothing is guaranteed. He does not have to make this roster. As a matter of fact, we will take a look at the receiver position after this signing and what it may signify. But let's talk about why this move potentially was made. So the first thing you have to look at, it's the most obvious thing in the room, is that this guy played under Eric Bieniemy in Kansas City. So right away, he comes in very familiar with the playbook and what is going to be asked of him and the rest of the team. I think he is a guy that can, and similar to Marcus Kemp, who they brought in earlier, going to be able to help teach this playbook to other players, right? So you speed up. The more ex-Kansas City Chiefs players you have, the faster you're able to teach the offense to the rest of the team. It's not hard. It's not rocket science. Andrew Wiley is on that offensive line, going to help those offensive linemen along with the playbook and, things that they expect and how things are supposed to be run. Same thing with these receivers. All right, you bring another former Kansas City Chief in here. He knows the playbook, can help these guys acclimate faster. So that doesn't hurt, okay? Obviously, that stands out as the first reason why he's here. Another reason, Washington moved on from one of its core special teams players last season, right? This offseason, you move on from Cam Sims. There's a massive void there, and even though we have gunners, we have other guys that can fill that role, he was still an integral part of special teams. He was on every single one of them. And he also posed a threat as a receiver if he got in the game as well. So you're not just looking to add a guy that can just run down on special teams, okay? Because you can find anybody to do that. You want a guy that's going to add value as a special teams player, but if his name is called as a receiver or as a special teams player, he can contribute in a multitude of ways, which leads me to my next point, which is Byron Pringle also is a guy that can return kickoffs. Did that in Kansas City, did it in community college, was very, very successful at it in community college. One of the reasons he even got an opportunity with Kansas City, if not for Mecole Hardman in Kansas City during his entire duration as a Chief, he would have gotten more opportunities to return kickoffs, possibly punts. He was more of a kickoff guy. But Mecole Hardman being so dynamic, and part of the reason they drafted him was because they wanted him to return kickoffs and punts. So Pringle never really got an opportunity. He got an opportunity in Kansas City once, returned one for a touchdown. So that's also something. Remember, if they're viewing Antonio Gibson, in the light that I think they're viewing him in, he's going to be way too important to put back there on kickoffs. So if they're viewing him as this Swiss Army knife that can do a little bit of everything, catch it out of the backfield, run the football, they don't probably want him anywhere near special teams on kickoffs. I could be wrong about that. But if they can find somebody else to do it, they probably would. So I think that's another reason he's here, because he can return kickoffs as well. Don't know about him as a punt returner. Can't say if he did that or not, successfully in community college. But I'd like to think that if he could return kickoffs, he probably can return punts too, and probably did in college. But that's another reason you bring him. And then lastly, he's a special teams fiend. All right, one of those guys. He's a 4.46 40 guy. He can get down there in a hurry, down punts inside the 1, inside the 5, those types of things. He's exactly the kind of guy you're looking for on special teams. So he checks all of the boxes as a back end of the roster receiver type of player. So Washington's back end is a question mark at receiver. Let's be honest. Last year, they kept 6 receivers. Right now, as it currently stands, only 4 guys are guaranteed a roster spot. If everything goes the way that we assume it's going to go, only 4 guys are guaranteed a roster spot. Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, De'Ami Brown, Curtis Samuel. After that, all bets are off, okay? They're going to keep no less than 5, but the likelihood is they're going to keep 6. They're going to keep 6 receivers. So I look at it from this perspective. There's probably 4 receivers battling for 2 spots right now, as it stands. Okay, 4 receivers, 2 spots. Now, who are the 4 receivers? I don't know. Let's look at this group and let's kind of see if we can't kind of determine what's what. Okay, so we talked about some of these undrafted guys in the offseason. I did a series kind of chronicling a lot of these receivers who might have a shot to crack the back end of the roster with a really, really strong camp and preseason. And really, it needs to be a strong camp in conjunction with a fantastic preseason, to be honest with you. And you have to be able to play one hell of a special teams. So Bryson Tremaine, undrafted out of Stanford, is a guy that has some size, can run a little bit. And so, if you're looking for that size element that Cam Sims brought, Bryson Tremaine is probably your man. He's going to have to play one hell of a special teams, as I just brought up. Mitchell Tinsley, not a speed demon by any stretch of the imagination. If you're looking for more of a receiver type, I think Tinsley is where you'll go. Don't really know how much he can affect special teams yet. He wasn't really asked to do that in college because he was more of a receiving threat. Jalen Sample, small school guy, played at Minnesota State. Mankato, super raw. I don't think he's a guy that is in this conversation, to be honest with you. Dax Milne, obviously, here last year, returned both punts and kickoffs at one point, was reduced to just the punt duties and returning punts. That didn't go all that well, but that doesn't take away from the fact that he can be a problem as a receiver. And as I've said already, a lot of people are down on Dax Milne because of the punt returning duties. But if he can stand alone as a wide receiver and separate himself from the punt returning responsibilities, he may have a chance to make this football team off the strength of him just being a dynamic slot option. So don't count Dax Milne out. Kyrick McGowan was here last year. All right, was one of the core special teamers last year on the roster. So again, he's going to be in the mix. Marcus Kemp, guy they signed immediately after the season. Once Bieniemy was brought here, the first move they made was they went out and signed Marcus Kemp. Big size, and at the time he looked like the perfect replacement for Cam Sims. You move on from a 6'5" target to a 6'4" guy. Cam Sims isn't a 4'4" guy. Marcus Kemp is. So there were a lot of similarities. And so I thought this was the ideal, replacement. Came from Kansas City, knows the offense, core special teamer, yada, 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 checks all the boxes. Obviously, he's in this conversation. Zion Bowens, another undrafted guy. Don't think he's going to make the team. Don't want to count anybody out. Again, he's going to need a strong preseason and camp in order to crack the roster, and he's going to have to make sure he's killing it on special teams. Kaz Allen is the guy that we've circled all offseason as a UDFA from UCLA. Return punts and kickoffs, was dynamic in that role. Not as fast as people thought he was going to be. And so I think that kind of got him to where he is now as an undrafted guy. Has some talent, has some ability. Can he put it all together fast enough to make an impact to land him on the roster? We desperately could use an upgrade in the punt and kickoff return department. So he could be the answer to all of our special team return woes, or he could just be another guy. And if he's a Jag, he won't be on this roster. So looking at this list, these are all the receivers before Washington signed Byron Pringle. Now, remember, Washington made a move yesterday to bring a kicker on board. All right. Washington makes a move today to sign a receiver. That's 2 roster spots that they've added. That means they've got to take some away. Where are they going to take them away from? Could be this wide receiver group right here. You're bringing in a receiver. It makes enough sense to take one away. So who knows which one of these guys won't be here. My guess is if it is a receiver, it'll be one of these Jalen Sample or Zion Bowens type of guys. Bryson Tremaine maybe. It'll be one of those types of guys, right? But we'll see. At the end of the day, as I mentioned, Curtis Samuel, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, and De'Ami Brown are locks to make this football team. Those 4 guys are going to be on this team. The question is, who are the other 4? I'm going to limit this number to 4 guys competing for potentially 2 spots. If they don't feel like there are enough good football players at receiver to warrant 6 spots, they could trim it down to 5. I find it hard to believe because a lot of your core special teamers come from wide receiver. I find it hard to believe that they're not going to keep 6 receivers. So my guess is in this mix, it's probably going to be Mitchell Tinsley, Dax Milne, Kyrick McGowan, Marcus Kemp. And again, we don't know who they're going to cut. One of these guys that I just mentioned could be cut. But if they don't cut any of the guys that I'm thinking about, I think Mitchell Tinsley, Dax Milne, Kyrick McGowan, Marcus Kemp, and Byron Pringle are competing for your 5th and 6th spots at receiver. And if you want to take one of those guys out, if you want to trim it to 4, like I said initially, because that was 5, Mitchell Tinsley is the guy that would be first on the chopping block. I think it would be Dax Milne, Kyrick McGowan, Marcus Kemp, and Byron Pringle. But again, we will see what they decide to do. So very interesting move made by Washington. I did not see this coming. I did not think they were looking to add any help at the wide receiver position. I thought that we were, really loaded and armed, for the training camp period into the preseason. Didn't really feel like we needed to add anything particular at that position, but they feel otherwise, and I don't have any issues with it. And Pringle is a guy that is dynamic and explosive. He produced in Kansas City with Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, with Eric Bieniemy as the offensive coordinator. So there is a rapport there. And so don't dismiss him. He's not one of these signings that we've made, where you could just dismiss the guy and say he's not making the football team. We've had several of those signings, including Cam Dantzler, who's already not here, right? We've signed enough of those guys where you go, okay, he's not making the football team. The Drew Himmelmans of the world. Oh yeah, he's not making the team. Somebody asked me, hey, what about the 6'8" tackle? He's not making the team. Don't worry about that. Yeah, don't bog yourself down with names that you don't need to remember. He's not making a football team. This is different. Byron Pringle, when it's all said and done, the dust settles, smoke clears, he could end up being on this roster. So we'll see what happens. Very interesting move made. I wonder if they're done. Now I'm starting to question, 2 signings in 2 days, barring anything happening, right? Injuries or anything like that, any unforeseen circumstances. I wonder if they're not done yet. Could they go in a different direction, say linebacker? Could they've already signed a tight end. I don't think they're going to do anything else at tight end. They've already signed a tight end. And that's another interesting position to take a look at, a hard, long look at, is tight end. Do you even need to keep 4 this year? The number has always been 4. Do you even need to keep 4 this year? Could you just go with 3 and potentially a fullback? Instead of a fourth tight end, could you go with 3 tight ends and a fullback instead? I mean, we have some on the roster, right? So these are all questions that you have to ask yourself. And if you decide to go with 4 tight ends, could you go 5 receivers and then the fullback as your 4th running back? Again, these are all questions that we have to play around with because this is a different offense. Before, when we knew how the offense was set up with Scott Turner, there were no fullbacks on the roster, right? There was no need for the fullback because we weren't running a ton of I formation. There wasn't a lot of, 2 back sets and things of that nature. This is a different offense that does feature a fullback at times. So is the fullback's role great enough to warrant a roster spot where you would have to trim off fat somewhere else? Again, these are all questions that we will probably gain a better perspective of and some clarity as the training camp period progresses, as we get to the preseason and we see them on the field. We will probably have a better understanding of what it is they're actually looking to do and how this roster will probably formulate. Again, there are not a ton of roster spots available. We've had this conversation already. There are 53 spots. I'm going to go out on a limb and say 45 of them are probably already spoken for. It's those last 5 to 8 that we could have a real discussion about on the offensive line. Like, defensive line is locked up. If everybody's healthy, it's locked in, right? We know the guys. Now the question becomes, are you keeping an extra one? Or are you going to keep it at 9? Because you're going to probably keep 4 defensive tackles and 5, edge rushers. Are you going to add a 6th edge rusher? Or are you going to add a 5th defensive tackle because someone was so good and make it a round number like 10? But right now, it's the Bama Wall, Fedarian Mathis, and John Ridgway. Those are your 4 defensive tackles. They could keep a 5th. No harm in that. But those are the 4 defensive tackles. We know Young. We know Sweat. We know J.S. Dub. We know KJ Henry. Like that's 4 defensive ends. F.A. Obata is the 5th and final guy that I think they're keeping on the defensive line. But could they keep a 6th? Could they make space for Casey Toohill? Who knows? We'll see, right? All depends on how the numbers play out at other positions. Do you keep a fullback? Do you keep a 4th tight end? We'll find out. Or instead of a fullback, do you keep a 4th running back? Don't know. Do you need 6 receivers? Probably so. Could you trim it to 5? Maybe. I doubt it. How many safeties you keeping? How many corners you keeping? How many linebackers you keeping? Again, that all of these things will start to come into focus as we get, deeper into training camp, into the preseason, and we get a better feel for what it is they're trying to accomplish. So, that's going to do it for me. I didn't want to keep you here long. Just wanted to talk about this real quick. Interesting move made by Washington, signing Byron Pringle. Does have some an off-field transgression, a reckless driving charge with a child in the back. Something to note that happened when he was in Chicago last year. So again, they vetted him. Eric Bieniemy vouched for him, or he would not be here. So I don't think it's going to be a problem nor a distraction or any of the sort. So you do want to mention that. But at the end of the day, anybody that comes from Kansas City that ends up here got the clearance and the blessing from Eric Bieniemy. Andrew Wiley isn't here if Eric Bieniemy doesn't give them the thumbs up. Marcus Kemp isn't here if Eric Bieniemy doesn't give them the thumbs up. Byron Pringle isn't here if Eric Bieniemy doesn't give the thumbs up. And I still don't think anything's going to happen with Kareem Hunt here. Obviously, if some unforeseen circumstances were to arise, I would not rule that out. But after seeing some of these moves and bringing in another former Chiefs player, I wouldn't rule anything out. I myself don't think that Kareem Hunt ends up here in Washington. I don't. And I told you guys that, and I told you it was rumor season and it was clickbait season. Be careful, all of that good stuff. Josina Anderson put it out there in the atmosphere, so everybody thought it was true, you know. And I said, nah, I'm not buying it. Well, we'll see. Okay, because I didn't see this one coming. So, and again, Byron Pringle isn't Kareem Hunt. Kareem Hunt's on another level. Like, you're going to have to spend a little bit more money. And I'm not saying a ton more, but you have to spend more money on bringing in a Kareem Hunt than you do a Byron Pringle. So, also keep that in mind as well. Anyway, I digress. That's going to do it for me, your man Louie T. I thank you guys for joining me on this quick, impromptu Command Post live episode. Washington inks a deal 1 year with former Bears and Chiefs wide receiver Byron Pringle. What does it mean? It means that there's some real competition on the back end of the roster at the receiver position, as I've laid out for you. Only 4 spots are spoken for right now. There were 6 guys kept on the roster at receiver last year. I don't see why 6 won't be the number this year. And if that is in fact the case, 2 spots are available and no one has claimed either one of them. It's honestly a much easier path to making the roster this year than it was last year at receiver, because Cam Sims was there and we knew he was going to make the team as well. So that was 5, and you had pretty much 3 or 4 guys battling for one spot. Hell, we even had Alex Erickson here last year battling with Dax Milne, among others, trying to make the football team. So they were all battling for one spot. This year, with no Cam Sims, you free up another spot. So now there are 2 receiver spots potentially available. How many of those guys are truly in the mix? Only time will tell. Anyway, I digress. Thank you guys for joining me. You know what it is. Post up. Take command. I will see you guys for the Louie T Network podcast a little bit later on today, if that's your speed. If not, anything else happens with the team, you know what it is. You'll see this face invading your space. Until then, you guys have a good one. Take care.